All right. So, woohoo! Yay! Guys, welcome to another episode of the Greek Audio Geek. I am really excited. I'm going to call him my new file buddy, Ron from New Record Day. Hello, Ron. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, and I want to thank you guys. You guys had reached out to me in regards to my channel. I went out there for those of you who haven't seen my posts and visited you and Danny at GR Research. And I just want to preface that with a couple of things. First of all, dude, your room sounds amazing.
Thank you.
And it's clear that there's a lot of time and effort that's been put in that. And for those of you who've been to shows and go to a lot of other audiophile things, you learn that having a great sounding room is actually rare,
Yeah.
and it's not as common as you think it would. And also, just I want to mention, make sure you check out the new bookshelf speakers that they have. I heard them at Ron's place, and they are just, again, I'm a horn guy, but I will tell you, for traditional speaker designs, I thought they were phenomenal.
Thanks, man. I appreciate
Ron,
that.
tell me a little bit about, and we're just going to go with the flow here, but tell me a little bit about how you got into this. You've had your channel for a long time now, and a little bit of your journey.
Yeah, yeah. For as long as I can remember, I've always been kind of obsessed with sound in general. I certainly enjoyed music growing up. I didn't grow up in a household, which is pretty typical for a lot of audiophiles, like, my dad would put on records or my mom would put on records. That wasn't me at all. I don't think my dad even cared about, hi-fi or music or anything like that. But I think around junior high, yeah, it was junior high. My brother and I, who's just a year ahead of me, we started playing guitar, and we were playing like nylon string acoustic guitars, and we were taking classes and things like that, and it was a lot of fun, and we grew in that and enjoyed it, and I remember there was a weekend that we were going to my mom and dad were divorced, and we were going over to my mom's house for visitation. And I'll never forget it. We were sitting there eating dinner, and my stepdad, Ron, he was like, hey, how's it going, like, with your classes and your guitars and stuff? And we're like, oh, it's great. Like, we're having a blast. And I remember he's like, have you guys ever heard of Neil Young? And I guess I had, but I was like, not really. And he's like, well, come and check this out. And he pulls us into the living room after we're done eating. And I think it was just, I got lucky. I think the fact that I just sat down in the right spot, he had this massive, like, cliche 80s Kenwood stereo system loaded to the tilt with EQ, equalizers and tape deck and all of that stuff.
Lots of lights going up and down.
Lights going up and down and these big giant tower speakers. And he dropped the needle. He grabbed a record, a Neil Young Decade record, and dropped the needle on Cinnamon Girl. And he just gooses it, And I think it was just, I was lucky because there was a moment I was in the right spot where I couldn't, it's like your brain kind of breaks in a way. You're like, wait a minute, hold on. What's happening right now? And of course, being young and just having that impression upon me, it was just like, man, this is nuts. Like, I'm hearing something that I'm connecting with in a very different way. And I think that was kind of the very first moment where I was obsessed with the staging. I was obsessed with the imaging. I was obsessed with, it's like that first time where you're hearing a decent setup and you're like, he's right in the middle. How is that happening? It's just like this crazy thing that happens. But after that, I started chasing things, chase and obviously, being just a kid, I didn't have money to go out and buy anything, so started with like headphones and things like that. And I got really big into headphones and eventually got like a little 2 channel, system. And I was doing a lot of thrift store hunting and trying to cobble systems together, which I still love to do. There's something really cool about that. Some of the best finds, like 70 stereo finds I've got out of a thrift store. I mean, we got back in the day when I got started on the channel, I did a really old video. It was Yamaha versus Yamaha, and it was a great video where I got this Yamaha CA 2020, no, 2010 from a thrift store, and it was like $30. Silver face beauty, built like a freaking tank. And I put that up against, one of their more recent, I think it was like an AS 2300 or 2200. This was like a really expensive amp. And dude, it's not like one clobbered the other in every single aspect, but it was a fight. Like that old Yamaha was like, sit down, son. I got something to say. And
Respect your elder.
yeah, respect your elder, absolutely. And I think that it just goes to show, I mean, if we're talking about like the 70s, late 60s, like that was such an interesting era for music and for hi-fi. A lot of these guys that were into it, it's like the golden age of hi-fi because they were intentionally listening. Similar to what I put up in this room is like, there were dudes that were really fine tuning things and caring about music and intentionally sitting down and listening to a record. It's not like I'm on my phone and music is on. No, that's not what was going on. Like that was the activity. And so, that's kind of my beginnings, was that cinnamon girl moment. And just from there, hitting the ground running, putting systems together. And at a young age, I just became obsessed with soundstage. I became obsessed with imaging. And, I think that you probably could get an idea of that based on what you heard with Ari. Is like, I've continued to chase that. It's like that thing that opens up and it kind of gives you that three-dimensional holographic imaging. I'm a sucker for that. I love it.
That's an awesome story. And I will tell you that for me, it's similar but different. I distinctly remember my earliest memories. My grandmother, or as we say in Greek, Yaya, had gotten me a self-powered record player. And yes, back then they were record players. They weren't turntables. And it had two little powered speakers. I don't even know what brand it was. And for me, my love for music actually came from my mother because we would always be in the car and she would always crank it and listen. And it was I'll say motherly influenced music of the 70s, which means Neil Diamond, ABBA, stuff like that.
Heck yeah.
And I just remember I would just play record after record after record. I loved it. And my dad had a system. I remember it was a Panasonic tuner, and then he
Yeah.
upgraded to Onkyo, and he had acoustic research speakers. And I remember always just not knowing that it wasn't necessarily good or bad, but just always wanting more.
Yeah.
And for me, the first time I ever truly heard an amazing system, which I'm sure by my standards now wouldn't be so amazing, would have
Right.
been in the late 90s. My buddy and I went to a store up in Providence, Rhode Island, and they had a Krell integrated, the brand new Krell integrated. Never heard of Krell,
Yeah.
and Focal bookshelf speakers.
Yeah.
And that for me was, even though the sound wasn't perfect, to your point, the first time you really start hearing stereo imaging and depth.
What
And
is?
yeah,
Yeah.
it literally was a lightning strike. So ever since then, for me, it's funny. For me, I've gone from solid state to tubes to solid state, now back to tubes. And I'm convinced I'm with tubes for the long run now because your Yamaha story hit home for me because I find myself moving backwards in terms of what I think sounds good in terms of technology, whether it be
Yeah.
the Manley 300Bs, which I know you've heard and you
Yeah.
had for a while. I mean,
Loved it.
that's not cutting edge technology.
No. No.
or whether it be the other tube amps I have or the horn speakers that I have, that I really think from a musicality point of view, which is the most important thing to me, that emotional
Sure.
connection. I
Sure.
think what's old is new.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I remember even talking to Ivana about that, and she made it clear like a lot of these designs, they're not like anything radical or trying to reinvent, the wheel. A lot of them are just tried and true classic designs, and specifically about Manly. I mean, one of the things that I appreciate is I think that they have a very broad understanding of tubes are important, but also the iron behind the tubes. And as soon as she was started talking about winding those transformers and doing it all by ear and test bedding different transformers and listening to them, I was like, these people really care. Like they
And they
really
get
care
it.
about it. They get it. Yeah, they get it. Yeah, for sure. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, I agree with you. Um, I when I hear it's funny because a lot of times I hear companies will say they've come up with something new and improved.
Yeah.
And that usually makes me nervous because in my mind, that usually means more hi-fi analytical in the pursuit of clarity
Mm,
and insight. And again, for me, it's all about the emotional connection. And I wasn't smart enough to know any of this. I credit my friend who worked on nuclear submarines as an engineer, but also had a recording studio.
yeah.
And he taught me so much. He taught me what to listen for. He taught me that more expensive isn't necessarily better. He taught me about tweaks and vibration and what to listen for. And so I credit everything that I know as a foundation to him.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because I think that a lot of people end up chasing their tails. And I will go on record as saying I think one of the worst places to get hi-fi, and when I say hi-fi, I should say more music advice, is a forum, because
Mm,
I think everybody thinks they're right, whereas I think we need to take the approach of it's great exposure, but at the end you need to decide what's right for you, and nobody
yeah.
else can tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah, you couldn't have said it any better, and I agree. And it's no different, in the comments section. And having done this for as long as I have, it's like I always try to help people that have a question. But if somebody just throws something out there like, "What amplifier should I buy?" It's like, okay, let's sit down. It's like, man, which speaker is the best? It's like, well, first of all, there is no such thing as that. It's like there's no such thing as a perfect loudspeaker. There's going to be a compromise one way or another, and the same thing can be said for amplifiers. And I think that it goes to show a lot of times, like when you're putting a system together, there is a synergy involved, and there's certain things that you cobble together that just works. As an example, like when you heard the Aria system, Dynaco uh, that Dynaco 70, that's been rebuilt by Miller Audio, it's freaking amazing
I
with these
love that
speakers.
thing.
It's so good. And so, it's like obviously as a reviewer, I feel like it's my responsibility to date the other girls and try solid state. And later I'll, I got in the Hagel H400 and I'll try that, and it's
Yeah,
like, well, what are its strengths? Because, what I'm searching for and what you're searching for, well, that's built on a long history of listening and weaving your way through this to go, this is the kind of ice cream that I like. And if I'm throwing something on there, it's like I tried the tears with Arya, and it's like, okay, I, there's some there's some cool things about these, and they're doing some cool things. And for a dude that wants to like rock out with Arya, sure, yes, this will do it. I mean, those tiers are pumping out like 230 watts per channel, and they're just beasts, and they're massive, and they do that. But you lose some of that magic that I'm hearing in the vocals, and some of that, like you would describe it as like an emotional connection, this sensory of like, she's right there, she's singing to me, or he's singing to me. And always a it's always difficult to recommend the right item, and it takes time to like talk to people and like figure out, well, what do you listen to and what is your room like, and that kind of stuff. There's it's this is such a big broadband thing to get into, and there is no, I guess that my point is, there is no silver bullet. There is no one thing that is the fix all for everybody. It just doesn't exist.
I agree. And for me, it's the journey that I
Yeah.
find exciting. But it's funny. I will comment one thing on the women at night after the long. My mother. She was talking to my mother, so that's why she's on my brain. My wife will sit on the couch next to me, and I'll
Yeah.
be on the couch, and we usually will put on really crappy, cheesy TV, like the dubbed over Korean on Netflix Love Island shows, right? And because I just love the brainlessness, I'm either creating content or I'm looking for new content or whatever.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, she'll kind of look over what she'll do. And sometimes I'll be looking at like a picture of a horn speaker, and sometimes there'll be like a woman in that picture. And she looked at me the other day and she goes, I absolutely feel 100% confident knowing you. You're actually looking at the horn speaker and not the women. And it was the truth. I laughed and I was like, she's right.
Yeah.
I, I just thought that was absolutely hilarious.
You're like, what woman?
Yeah,
Oh.
what woman? What? I see, oh, look at tubes. I see tubes.
Oh, it's totally true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
it really is.
have you experienced or been to a lot of the hi-fi shows? Do you go to any of the hi-fi
So
shows at
I've
all?
been to several of them,
Yeah.
and it was interesting because the first one I went to, I was really overwhelmed. I was there for several days and I almost didn't know how to take it in. I find it's very much a mental overload
Yeah.
because every time you go into a room, you got to start from scratch. You got to try and figure out, okay, what am I hearing that's the room? What's the speakers? What's the gear? So I'm looking forward definitely to Florida again this year, and then also the one in Dallas, the Southwest Audio Fest. That was a really good show. It was interesting getting feedback from the Dallas one last year. I was talking to a lot of the distributors, and they thought it was one of the best shows they'd ever been to, even though it was the first year, because they felt as though the people that were coming to the show were actual buyers
Yeah.
versus tire kickers. And I thought that was really interesting. But generally speaking, and you and I had talked about this a little bit in the past, I find with most of the shows, you spend all your time there and you're lucky if you hear two good rooms.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they're fun to go to. You got to do it.
Yeah.
But, you
Yeah.
know,
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And I agree. Where I was going with that, like with your story about, the girl and the horns, it's like it always kind of cracks me up. Like I've seen a couple of shows where they got like some kind of a hot chick in there, and it's like, these guys don't give a shit. They really don't even care. It's like they're gonna just walk right past that girl because they're already awkward. We're all a bunch of weird audiophiles, and they're gonna be like 300 B tubes, or something like that. It's like, I don't know how much you're paying her, but she doesn't need to be here. Nobody
it's funny you
cares.
say that because it was a brand at the Florida show last year, and they actually had, I'm not going to say the brand. They had a woman there who was really this is going to sound horrible. When I say, I don't want to say intelligent because that means I think women aren't intelligent. I should say extremely knowledgeable with hi-fi, the gear, the
Yeah.
audio, how it works. And I had a conversation with her. She was really, really impressive, very well spoken.
Yeah.
Honestly, she blew away just about every other guy that was there
Yeah.
in managing the room. And when I was talking to other people in the industry, every single one to a T said, oh, did you go to such and such a room? She was like so smart and she knew so much more than a lot of the other guys in the other room. So to your point, it wasn't about that it was necessarily a woman, it was about the audio.
Yeah. 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 It's hilarious, isn't it?
I don't think there's any way I could say that and that's not going to come out wrong when I replay this video.
No, no, no. Good luck. I wish you the best with all the comments. He said it. I didn't say anything.
Yeah, I just sat there and nodded and
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Sure.
I'm
Have
thinking,
fun with
Michael,
that.
dig deeper. So,
Yeah.
all right. So I gotta call you out because I want to actually take a little bit of credit for this, if you'll allow me.
Yeah.
Talk to me about your discovery of Frank Sinatra.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. What was the song that we were listening to over and over at Danny's? It was
It was Fly Me to the Moon. Was it?
Fly Me to the
Yeah,
Moon.
with Count
Yeah.
Basie.
Yeah, dude, so I'm obsessed with sound and I'm obsessed with recordings and all that kind of stuff, and kind of similar to what you were saying about, you're always going backwards, like you're going to the roots. I even said this when we were listening. I was like, dude, we haven't learned a damn thing about recording. We've learned nothing. And I've experienced this time and time again. In fact, like over on the shelf, I've got all my records and St. James Infirmary. It's like listening to, Louis Armstrong, some of those records, and it's like, holy crap. This was recorded like in the 50s with a couple of mics at best,
Yep.
you know. We have learned nothing. And it just dawned on me that I have no issue with Frank Sinatra and I've never had an issue, but at the same time, I've never really explored Frank Sinatra, and that morning when I came out here, I felt inspired by you to like, let's start traveling. Let's start peeling back this onion and see what it's all about. And I had a great time, man. It was fun. I was just drinking coffee and listening to Frank Sinatra.
Well, and I think that for me, the magic, there's a Joe Williams song, What Are We Doing New Year's Eve? It's just him and the piano. Yeah, there's a couple of Louis Louis Armstrong's live at the BBC and things like that. Uh, I what I love about the Frank and the Joe Williams and those old recordings is that on the when you have your system dialed in, you can actually hear his voice. It's almost like he's taunting the microphone. It's like the
Yeah,
way you can picture him. And for me, it's less about necessarily do I hear all the instruments? Is it powerful? Although that's definitely a huge part of it.
sure.
But if I can hear them actually just cradling that microphone with passion, that is what I usually get out of those recordings because I find a lot of that isn't in the modern day recordings. Although we have some good modern day recordings, I find it's missing that rawness, that lifelikeness.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, so hats off to you, buddy. Cheers. You got me to Frank
Cheers. Yeah,
Sinatra.
actually, I've got my Diet Coke from McDonald's.
That's awesome, man. Yeah,
So
no, it's great.
anything new and exciting that gear wise or things you're discovering or anything like that?
You know,
Guys, I'm the Greek audio geek and I approve of this message. Opa!